Robby, what's on your radar?
Well, lately we've talked quite a bit on this show about Florida's so-called Don't Say Gay bill, which would prohibit school personnel from talking about gender and sexuality with students. Now, as I've made clear, I think this bill is an appalling overreach. Young people who have reached a certain age, let's say junior high, and have questions about their sexuality or gender identity should absolutely be able to confide in a counselor or even a teacher without fearing that they would get that official in trouble or, even worse, submit themselves to mandatory outing, as a withdrawn amendment to the bill would have mandated. Now, that said, parents who are worried that their young kids are being harmed by an uncompromising progressive ideology as it relates to gender, not so much sexuality, but gender, well, they do not have totally misplaced fears. Gender categories, male, female, fluid, etc., are a controversial and unsettled part of the culture, and some who have studied these issues actually believe there's a social contagion effect, i.e. the more that young people hear about new identities, about gender, the more likely they are to experience what's called gender dysphoria. In other words, they feel like they are currently the wrong gender. Now, that doesn't mean we should refuse to educate kids about it or hide them from the reality that transgender people exist. And if there are clear signs, unequivocal signs that a young person is experiencing gender dysphoria, absolutely, they need counseling. They need help. We don't need schools to push unsettled ideas about the supposed malleability of gender on very young kids, and we shouldn't act like traditional boy-girl distinctions are avoidable in schools. As far as sports, bathrooms, and locker rooms go, they're not avoidable. All that brings me to a very disturbing story from Weaver Elementary School in San Bernardino, California. According to the Daily Mail, the school held a sleepaway science camp for fifth grade girls. The camp counselors slept in the same cabin with the girls, according to KTLA. Here's the catch. Some of those counselors could have been biological male because they identified with they-them pronouns. Under the district's policies, they allegedly would have been allowed to stay near the girls. Now, the camp's assistant director blamed state law, saying, per California law, we place staff in cabins they identify with. So parents were furious about this. Now, it appears that no actual biological males did sleep in the girls' cabin, but had one tried, the camp was making clear that they would have accommodated them under this law. So my sense is that it's this kind of craziness that has inspired a backlash among parents who feel they no longer have any control over the policies of public schools, and that these schools care more about catering to a very progressive activist notion that all differences between males and females can and should be eroded, even at a very young age. This sentiment has created the backlash that allows bad, overbroad bills like the Don't Say Gay bill to be introduced. So we saw a similar thing play out in Loudoun County, Virginia, where the district was far too indifferent to an actual case of sexual abuse in the girls' bathroom. Now, that story ended up being a lot more complicated than certain conservative news sites were reporting, but it was still indicative of what can go wrong when public officials go too far and embrace norms that are, well, they're still up for debate. The locker rooms, camp dormitories, and bathrooms of teenagers, they can be really uncomfortable spaces that include quite a bit of bullying and harassment. It would be naive for public officials to throw up their hands, say that gender is an arbitrary and easily transgressed category, and any kid can identify however they want. We are witnessing just how nonsensical that view is at the level of elite sports, where Leah Thomas, a 6'4" trans woman who is currently destroying her and lapping her biologically female competitors in swim races. It isn't bigotry or transphobia to believe that this just isn't fair, that this doesn't make any sense. Thomas clearly has an advantage. To pretend otherwise is to erase the concept of womanhood entirely. Now, trans people deserve our love and support, and transitioning, I think, is absolutely the right choice for some people who suffer gender dysphoria. There's nothing wrong or irrational about it. Every human being is a unique individual with unique needs. And some erosion of these categories may even be socially beneficial. That doesn't mean we should overturn the concept of gender entirely, or that kindergarten classrooms are the place to adjudicate these definitions. They are not. So I want to talk about, this issue a little bit more. We've done a couple segments on the bill in particular, and yes, I think it's a bad bill. Criminalizing school officials from having conversations. School officials need to be able to be there from kids, especially when they reach their preteen and teenage years. Yeah, so no good on any of that. That's the old-fashioned socially conservative agenda raising its ugly head. All that said, it's certainly the case that some progressive activists on gender issues are, I think, overreaching and pushing things that most parents are not comfortable with, that would create actual headaches in schools. Like, You can say that gender should be eroded or should not be as important a category as it has historically been, but you can't say just like anyone can be in the locker rooms like like those are not healthy spaces anyway. Right. And there's lots of bullying and harassment going on there. You can't just say that the boys can race in the girls' track and swim events. They're going to beat them all. It doesn't make any sense.
The camping case is an interesting one because I think Democrats and also activists on behalf of trans rights have to get to a place where they can deliver arguments to people who are just normies in the middle, and they're like, yeah, of course that makes sense, because the overwhelming majority of people are primed to support transgender rights.
Yes.
Like that's where we are as a country, and so they want to get there. And I did a segment a month or two ago on some very deep polling and focus groups that a trans rights organization had done, and they found that people want to support trans rights. But then when you ask more specific questions, they don't understand that the things that they're saying would get them called transphobic. And so I think the camping case is an interesting one because I think most people in the middle would say, no, if you're non-binary, if you identify as non-binary, but you are born male, right, then you shouldn't be sleeping in a cabin with fifth grade girls. That doesn't mean that non-binary people are necessarily a threat and dangerous to 11-year-old girls. That's often where that comment
right.
will be taken. Well, you think that all non-binary people are going to be pedophiles and rapists?
Right.
No, that's not what we're saying. If I went on a field trip with a fifth grade class, I would know that it's inappropriate for me to sleep in the cabin with the fifth grade girls.
Of course.
But that's not because I'm a pedophile or a rapist.
Right.
I would just understand
it's just not, you just don't do it. And it's a perfectly fine norm to leave in place.
Right, it's fine.
Don't
we
touch
don't
it.
do it.
It's fine.
Doesn't mean there's something wrong with you or something
right.
wrong with me or that
right.
society hates you. That's not what it means. It just means these are the guardrails that we've put up in place.
Right.
And so if the movement is going to pretend that these guardrails don't exist, then you're going to have people in the middle who are like, "What? That's what you mean by all of this? I'm not so sure about this." And then now you're losing people. You had won people, and now you're losing them. So I think people do have to take this stuff a lot more seriously. What do you say to those parents on that trip that wins
right.
them over?
What do you say to the parents of all these girls who are getting annihilated in these swimming events by Leah Thomas? I mean,
well, in the polling, right? And in the polling, and people could maybe go back and find that one. The organization found that not a single argument that they put up on that case brought people over to their side. Nothing. Like they tried to. The one that they had the most success with, but only moved at a point or two, was sports aren't really about competition. It's about teamwork and it's about character building. And so who cares who wins? That moved like a couple of people
right.
in their direction.
And that's
but it was
good
still
enough
an overwhelming.
That's good enough for grade school.
Yeah, that's
like
fine
at a level of elite competition.
And actually, I don't think you have any controversies over
right.
Gender and sports in grade school.
Right.
Because who cares? Like the girls and boys all play soccer together, and everybody's cool with that.
Right. Well, yeah, but then there is right. They all play soccer together in through 8th grade, but by 9th grade, the differences, the sex-based differences in ability are starting to become very ironclad and very across the board, right? Because for the 5th, 6th, 7th grade co-ed soccer, right, you're going to have girls that are taller and faster than some of the boys because of just how people are peaking and developing at different ages. By high school, it's sorting itself out that basically all of the men are stronger and faster than all of the women. Yeah. That's just true.
It does feel like some of the people who are engaging in this debate just don't have much experience with athletics.
Yeah.
So I played tennis in college and high school, and in high school we had this assistant volunteer coach who had been on the pro tour and was ranked in the 700s. Was what he had a good tournament. He peaked in like the 700s. As a job, he would then be a hitting partner for women's professional players in the top 10 and 20. And he was even with them. Like and would usually beat them, but they would be close matches.
Right.
So the 700th ranked male player out past his prime was competitive with and often beating the top 10.
Yep.
So should this random guy, like who's coaching Kent County High School's assistant coaching Kent County High School's tennis team, be able to identify as female and enter Wimbledon?
Right. Be the number one.
There are activists who would say that should be allowable.
The activists,
and that if you question that you're transphobic. And I think people have
98% of people would say no.
Right. That's what people have to understand.
Yeah.
That this is a question that decent people are still working through, and it doesn't mean that you're saying that somebody doesn't exist or that transgender people don't deserve rights, don't deserve all the civil rights that everybody else enjoys in this country, that they should be recognized and be able to live their lives with dignity.
Right. It's not saying anything wrong or bad about transgender people, or that there's anything wrong with transitioning. Right. I absolutely believe that there are people who are helped by transitioning, they should do it.
And all this is saying is that this is a spectrum that we're talking about. Like if somebody transitions early, then competing.
Maybe they don't. Yeah.
Competing later in life,
maybe
because you didn't have the advantages of matters. And so in the NCAA case with Leah Thomas, I think the rule there is 2 years of hormone therapy?
Right.
Is it it's either 1 year or 2 years. So in other words, there is a rule. Like the NCAA has a rule. In the NCAA, you can't just self-identify and then automatically sign up. There are lots of activists who would say that rule is transphobic, that you should be able to self-identify and automatically. They have a 2 year, or let's call it 2 years.
Yeah.
We can fact check that. 2 year hormone therapy regime that requires that you're required to go through before you then can compete. Is 2 years right? Is something else right? So in other words, these are open questions.
But if you'd taken testosterone for any other reason, you would be banned for life for these competitions, I'm pretty sure.
Well, you wouldn't be taking testosterone, right? You'd be taking estrogen
or whatever. Yeah.
Right.
So
right. No, that's interesting. Testosterone is a performance-enhancing drug.
Right.
That you will get banned for life from competing in Tour de France or the Olympics. So.
Right, but unless you're transitioning, so it's
right.
Yeah. So it's,
but all of these things are open questions, and it's not. I don't think it's bigotry for parents of these campers to be working through the questions.
We'll see how viciously we get criticized for this.
Starting off the mentions.
Our rising panel will join us coming up next.